Director Zeffis felt the first tremor through the crystalline floor of Sulla Station and knew, with the cold certainty that came from 3 decades of deep space operations, that something had gone catastrophically wrong. The tremor was subtle, barely a whisper through the station's massive superstructure. But in the precise, sterile environment of humanity's most advanced stellar observatory, even whispers screamed of disaster. The emergency klaxons began their mournful wail 18 seconds later, filling the central command hub with crimson light that painted the assembled research team in shades of blood and shadow. Through the vast transparent aluminum viewports that formed the station's crown, the neutron star they'd been studying for the past 6 months pulsed with malevolent beauty, its magnetic field lines visible as ghostly aurora against the cosmic dark. Too beautiful, Zeffis realized with growing horror. Too visible. Chief Science Officer Morlack of the Threnny Collective was the first to voice what they were all thinking, his 4 eyes blinking in rapid succession, a sign of extreme distress among his people. The magnetic containment grid is failing, he announced, his translator struggling to convey the tremor in his resonant voice. We're being pulled into the magnetosphere. The words hung in the recycled air like a death sentence. Sulla Station, for all its advanced technology and multi-species crew, was never designed to survive direct exposure to a neutron star's magnetic field. The radiation alone would cook them all within minutes. The gravitational tidal forces would stretch the station apart like molecular clay. How long? Zeffis asked, though part of her already knew the answer from the way her chief engineer's tentacles had begun their species' equivalent of panic writhing. At current rate of decay, Vorlash replied through her breathing apparatus, full containment failure in 47 minutes. After that, the Aquari engineer's translated words dissolved into static, either a technical malfunction or her brain simply refusing to calculate their chances of survival. Zeffis surveyed her command crew with the detached calm that had earned her this posting. 12 species represented in this room, each among the brightest minds their civilizations had produced. The Threnny with their mathematical precision, the Aquari with their engineering mastery, the Kethvar with their understanding of quantum mechanics that bordered on the mystical, all of them staring at the displays that showed their inexorable death spiral in real time. All of them except the human. Elena Vasquez sat at her engineering station with an expression that Zeffis had learned to recognize over their months together, the look of someone actively solving a problem rather than contemplating its impossibility. Her fingers moved across holographic interfaces with practiced efficiency, calling up schematics and power distribution charts while her colleagues wrestled with the mathematics of their doom. The backup containment systems, Zeffis asked, though she already knew the answer. Insufficient, Morlack replied promptly. We would need to increase power output by a factor of 12 to compensate for the primary grid failure. Our fusion reactors simply cannot generate that much energy without melting down and killing us faster than the neutron star, Elena finished, not looking up from her displays. Yeah, I got that part. The casual interruption sent a ripple of unease through the assembled aliens. Humans, Zeffis had observed, possessed an almost pathological inability to accept impossible situations as final. Where other species would begin preparation for dignified death, humans began preparation for increasingly improbable survival scenarios. However, Elena continued, her voice carrying that particular tone that made Zeffis' species' equivalent of hair stand on end. I've been running some calculations, and I think we might have another option. Vorlash's tentacles writhed faster. The mathematics are quite clear, Engineer Vasquez. There is no configuration of our current systems that can generate the required, you're right, Elena agreed cheerfully. We can't generate more power, but we might be able to use less. She gestured, and her display expanded to fill the central holographic projector. What appeared was a 3-dimensional schematic of Sulla Station, its elegant spires and research modules highlighted in cool blue. Overlaid across this familiar image was something that made every non-human in the room recoil instinctively. A pattern of red indicators showing massive structural modifications. What you're suggesting, Dr. Kethrel of the Kethvar Observatory team whispered, his normally melodious voice strained to breaking, is complete dismantlement of 70% of the station's superstructure. Not dismantlement, Elena corrected. Selective jettisoning. We dump everything that isn't absolutely critical for life support and propulsion. The outer research modules, the extended habitat rings, the secondary computer cores, all of it. We strip this station down to its absolute bare minimum mass. The silence that followed was the sound of a dozen brilliant minds trying to process what they'd just heard. Finally, Zephy's found her voice. Engineer Vasquez, those modules contain irreplaceable research data, decades of observation records, equipment worth more than some planetary budgets. And they're also increasing our mass by approximately 40,000 tons, Elena replied matter-of-factly. Every kilogram we jettison reduces the power requirements for the containment field. We shed enough dead weight, and our existing backup systems might actually keep us alive. Morlach's 4 eyes were blinking so rapidly they appeared to strobe. The calculations would need to be precise to the nanogram. Any error in mass distribution could send us tumbling into gravitational resonance. The margin for error is non-existent, Elena agreed. Which is why we need to start cutting things loose right now, before the field decay makes fine adjustments impossible. You're talking about gutting the station, Vorlash protested, her translator adding harmonic overtones of distress. Destroying years of work. I'm talking about staying alive long enough to build it again, Elena replied. Dead scientists don't publish papers. Zephy's felt the familiar mix of admiration and terror that seemed to accompany all human problem-solving. Where her own species would carefully weigh risks and probabilities, humans simply identified the least impossible option and committed to it with terrifying enthusiasm. The station's structural integrity, she began, will hold, Elena said with confidence that seemed to border on insanity. These support frameworks were over-engineered by a factor of 6, military-grade construction standards. We could lose half the superstructure and still maintain atmospheric pressure. And if you're wrong, Elena's smile was the expression of someone who had grown up on a world where everything from the weather to the wildlife was actively trying to kill her. Then we die slightly faster than we would have anyway. But if I'm right, we get to go home and tell stories about the time we turned a research station into a survival pod. The decision, when it came, was not the product of careful deliberation or democratic consensus. It was the simple recognition that the alternative was certain death, and humans had long ago taught the galaxy that certain death was merely another engineering problem to be solved. Do it, Zephy said. What followed was organized chaos on a scale that would have been impressive even by human standards. Elena's plan required the simultaneous jettisoning of 17 major structural components, each weighing thousands of tons and containing enough delicate equipment to bankrupt small civilizations. Worse, the process had to be executed with mathematical precision, too fast, and the sudden mass changes would destabilize the station's orientation. Too slow, and the magnetic field decay would reach critical levels before they finished. Elena divided the station's crew into teams, each responsible for prepping specific modules for jettison. The Threnny handled calculations, their mathematical minds tracking the complex interactions between mass, momentum, and magnetic field strength. The Aquari managed the technical aspects of separation, their engineering expertise crucial for safely disconnecting power and life support systems. The Kethvar monitored the neutron star itself, watching for any changes in its behavior that might affect their desperate gambit. And Elena did what humans did best. She improvised. The portside observatory module is stuck, Vorlash reported from the lower levels, her translated voice tight with panic. The separation charges fired, but the docking clamps won't release. The backup systems are not responding. How stuck? Elena asked, already moving toward the maintenance access shafts. The mechanical linkages appear to have fused under stress. It would require manual disconnection from the exterior hull. Every alien in earshot turned to stare at Elena with expressions of horror. Manual disconnection meant suiting up and going outside, exposing yourself to the increasingly chaotic magnetic environment surrounding the station. The radiation levels alone would be lethal within minutes. That's insane, Dr. Kethrel said flatly. No living being can survive in that environment. No sane living being, Elena corrected, already pulling on her emergency environment suit. Good thing sanity was never part of the job description. Zephyrs watched through the command center's displays as Elena emerged from the station's hull like some impossible fusion of technology and determination. Her suit's radiation meters were screaming warnings that would have sent any rational being fleeing back to safety. But Elena simply adjusted the display settings and continued working. The magnetic field was visible now, ghostly streamers of charged particles that painted the space around the station in shifting auroras of deadly beauty. Through this cosmic storm, Elena moved with practiced efficiency, her suit's maneuvering thrusters allowing her to navigate to the stuck docking clamps with mechanical precision. Radiation exposure is approaching critical levels, Morlack reported, his voice carrying the clinical detachment his species used to discuss impending death. She has perhaps 3 minutes before cellular damage becomes irreversible. She knows, Zephyrs replied, watching Elena work with tools that seemed impossibly primitive against the backdrop of neutron star physics. Manual cutters and mechanical leverage, brute force applied with surgical precision. The first clamp released with a shower of sparks that painted Elena's faceplate in brief, brilliant light. The second required her to physically brace herself against the station's hull and apply leverage that should have been impossible in zero gravity. 2 minutes, Morlack announced. The third clamp was damaged, its release mechanism partially melted by the increasing radiation bombardment. Elena stared at it for a moment, then did something that made every alien watching question their understanding of human psychology. She struck it with her tool, a perfectly calculated blow that transmitted force through the mechanism's weak point. That shouldn't work, Vorlash whispered. It worked. The observatory module drifted away into the cosmic dark, its absence immediately registering on the station's mass distribution sensors. Elena was already moving back toward the airlock, her suit's alarms painting her faceplate in warning lights. 58 seconds, Morlack said. Elena made it with 12 seconds to spare. Status report, she said over the comm, sounding like someone who had just completed routine maintenance, rather than performed what amounted to technological surgery in the heart of a cosmic storm. All modules successfully jettisoned, Vorlash reported, her translated voice carrying overtones of what might have been religious awe. Mass reduction 92% of target parameters. Containment field requirements now within backup system capabilities. The command center erupted in sounds that translated as cheering across a dozen species. They were alive. Against every probability, against every rational calculation, they were alive. But Elena was already studying new displays, her expression carrying that familiar look of someone still solving problems. We're stable for now, she announced, but we're going to drift for about 6 hours before the rescue ships can reach us. Might want to double-check the life support calculations. 6 hours, Zephyrs repeated, the words tasting like victory and exhaustion in equal measure. Could be worse, Elena replied with the casual optimism that seemed to characterize her entire species. Could have been 6 days. Later, as they waited for rescue in the stripped-down skeleton of what had once been humanity's most advanced research station, Zephyrs found herself studying the human engineer with new appreciation. Elena sat calmly at her reduced workstation, monitoring the backup systems that were keeping them all alive, apparently unbothered by the fact that she'd just performed what amounted to emergency surgery on a space station while being slowly cooked by neutron star radiation. I have to ask, Zephyrs said finally, how did you know that would work? Elena looked up from her displays with the expression of someone genuinely puzzled by the question. I didn't, she admitted, but it was the only option that gave us any chance at all. You risked everything on a possibility. I risked everything on a chance to keep risking everything, Elena corrected. That's kind of what we do. Dr. Kethrel, who had been quietly performing post-crisis calculations, looked up with an expression that translated as wonder. The probability of success for your plan was approximately 1 in 47. Better than 0, Elena replied cheerfully. But the risks were exactly the same whether we tried or not, Elena pointed out. We were going to die. At least this way, we got to choose how we wanted to try not dying. Morlach's 4 eyes blinked in the slow pattern that indicated deep thought among his people. Your species approaches impossible situations as though impossibility were merely inconvenient. Pretty much, Elena agreed. We've gotten pretty good at inconvenient. Zephy's watched the exchange with growing understanding. She'd worked with humans before, but always in controlled environments where their peculiar psychology could be managed and channeled. This was the first time she'd seen them in their natural element, facing certain death with nothing but ingenuity and stubbornness. The research data we lost, she said quietly. Years of work. We're alive to gather more, Elena replied. Data's just information. Lives are, she paused, searching for words that would translate properly. Lives are the only thing that actually matters. The rescue ships arrived exactly 6 hours and 17 minutes later, their crews expressing amazement that anyone had survived the station's encounter with neutron star physics. But as they watched the evacuation, Zephy's noticed something interesting. The other species treated their survival as a miracle, while the humans seemed to view it as simply another successful mission. Routine equipment failure, Elena reported to the rescue commander with perfect seriousness. Nothing we couldn't handle. Standing in the docking bay of the rescue vessel, watching Sulla Station's skeletal remains drift against the cosmic backdrop, Zephy's finally understood what made humans so uniquely valuable to the galactic community. It wasn't their technology or their scientific knowledge. Other species possessed those qualities in equal measure. It was their absolute refusal to accept that any problem was truly unsolvable. Director, Elena said, appearing beside her at the observation window. I've been thinking about the next station design. I have some ideas for improving the structural modularity. Zephy's felt her species' equivalent of laughter building in her chest. Of course, the human was already planning improvements. Of course, she was treating this disaster as simply another learning experience. Tell me, she said, and settled in to listen, as Elena Vasquez began designing humanity's next impossible solution to the universe's most inconvenient problems. Behind them, the neutron star continued its ancient dance, its magnetic field still painting the cosmos in deadly beauty. But for the first time in 6 months, Zephy's looked at it without fear. After all, she had humans on her team now. And humans, she was learning, made the impossible merely improbable. And improbable, as Elena would have said, was definitely better than 0.